Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me is my colleague, Clayton Jones.
Good evening.
And our guest tonight is Webster, who is here speaking on behalf of the women's marijuana movement. And we'll get to her in just a few minutes, but there are a couple of news items that I think have to be mentioned first. And I think probably the thing that's got everyone somewhat of a Twitter right now is that the election coming up in about 3 weeks has marijuana referenda of one kind or another on the ballot in several states.
Yes.
The biggest one has to be California's Proposition 19, which in effect would remove all of the state's legal prohibitions against growth, distribution, or use of marijuana by adults. And according to most of the polling I've seen, it seems to have a reasonable lead at this point. There's also a ballot initiative in Arizona for medical marijuana, an initiative in Oregon that would extend their medical marijuana to include distribution centers, and Massachusetts, in a rather strange way of doing things, has local opinion referenda in several locations in which the voters can express their opinion about whether or not they think the legislature should legalize marijuana. And also, I almost forgot it, South Dakota has a medical marijuana initiative on the ballot.
South Dakota's been trying to pass and grow hemp for quite a while now also.
Yeah, they were the leading state in hemp, and several of their farmers under the state hemp law actually, I believe, have a lawsuit that's been pending for several years against the DEA about the DEA's licensing provisions.
Mm-hmm.
So they have been interested in that side of the issue for some time.
Now, I need your opinion.
Okay.
California, let's just assume that Proposition 19 is going to pass.
Okay.
I've been reading. It seems to me that our feds are going to come around and say, we got international treaties that we've signed on to. We've got the federal law that supersedes state law. You're going to have to put that on hold for a while.
No. And actually, federalism is really less complicated than it looks. The treaty they're talking about, mainly the Single Convention on Narcotics, says that there will be national laws controlling commerce in marijuana. But under the federal system, if the federal government has a law, the states cannot do anything to hamper or interfere with or block the enforcement of that law. But the state does not have to actively enforce the law, and they do not have to copy it with their state laws. So the federal government can outlaw marijuana, and the state can say, okay, you outlaw marijuana, but we're not going to have any state laws against it. It's your problem. And that means that...
Okay, that'll be the same way as prohibition was back when...
Right, and if you go back and look at alcohol prohibition, as early as 1923, less than 3 years into prohibition, the New York State repealed all of its prohibition laws and told their police, don't participate in federal enforcement activities either. By the time prohibition had come to an end 10 years after that, at least 4 or 5 other states had done the same thing, including California. So California can simply say, okay, we're not going to play. Now, this means that the federal government can come in, they can arrest anyone they want to for violating the federal law against possession or sale of marijuana, try them in the federal courts, and if they get convictions, put them in a federal prison. But let's look at something else here. California last year had something over 60,000 arrests for simple possession of marijuana. The total number of DEA agents in the entire world is 5,500. That's smaller than the Los Angeles police force. 60,000 marijuana possession cases is more criminal cases than the entire federal court system handles in a year. The federal government simply has no way that they can move in and be street corner police on marijuana laws in California. Now, where the danger comes in, when I first lived in Louisiana a long time ago, the legal age to drink alcohol there was 18. It's now 21.
Right.
Do you know why?
Because the federal government said they would stop giving highway funds if
the
they
federal
didn't raise it.
government said we will not give you highway funds unless you raise the drinking age to 21. We will not give you highway funds unless you require people to have seat belts, and so forth and so on. Now, if Congress wants to, and notice it takes Congress, this isn't something the DEA could do. Congress could say, California, if you don't reinstate marijuana laws, then we'll cut off your highway funds or we will cut off something else. But I don't see California doing it. The other thing is the DEA or the FBI cannot tell a Los Angeles police officer or a state highway police to go out and arrest someone for violating the federal law. Several years ago, about 10 or 15 years ago, the Supreme Court said that it violated the federal Constitution for the federal government to try to order local police officers to prepare criminal background reports for people trying to buy guns under the federal gun legislation, that they could not interfere with the state's use of its own officers. So as far as the criminal law is concerned, now California can't say, Clayton, I order you to smoke a joint. They can't make you violate the federal law.
No.
They probably cannot even set up state weed stores like some states have state alcohol stores, because that would be ordering a state officer to violate the federal law. But they can very easily say, if it involves marijuana, it's not any of our business. Do what you want to do. Feds, you take care of your own business.
You don't think that, because if California enacts this law,
yeah,
the war is just totally done.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
It's over.
Yeah.
And I can't see him just rolling over that easily. I see him getting a restraining order.
I think they'll make a lot of noise. They may try to go to court. But I honestly cannot see any federal judge saying that the proposed California law is in any way unconstitutional.
With those bunch of Republican rednecks we got in there now?
Well, the funny thing is this plays right into their hands, because this is exactly the kind of opinion that Clarence Thomas or what's-his-face Alito or Scalia even could dictate in their sleep without even thinking about it, because it's exactly what they've been parroting for the last 20 years.
Okay.
This is not one. This is one which puts the conservatives on the side of California.
Okay.
So.
Well, that answers that.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to get into on the news is there was a shocking announcement that came out of San Marcos, Texas. And what was that?
It was a ruling and a decision that's been long overdue. They have decided to stop drug testing students.
Okay.
They had 5 positives in the last 3 years.
Okay. Now, once again, I think there's a couple of interesting hidden stories here. It was costing them about $25,000 to conduct these drug tests. That means it was costing about $8,000 per positive result they got. That's pretty expensive
Steep.
testing. And the other thing, it turns out, the federal government was paying for it.
Yeah, they gave them a
This was
grant.
all coming from a federal grant to pay for drug testing. And the reason why they quit the program was that their federal government grant ran out. And if they started having to look and go into San Marcos tax dollars, guess what? It just wasn't worth it.
Maybe we can get them to do the same thing with their programs.
Well, now, Ann, you've got a kid.
I have 3, actually.
3, actually.
Yes.
What do you think of stopping the drug testing in San Marcos?
I don't think it should have been tested to begin with.
Yeah.
It's a violation of personal rights. I would never take a drug test, and I wouldn't expect my children to take one either.
Yeah. Well, now, the funny thing is, this has been studied intensely all across the country, and generally speaking, schools find about 1% positive test results, and studies show no difference at all about the amount of drug use in schools with testing and schools without testing. I believe we have a caller. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Do you have a question or comment for us?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay. Go ahead.
Turn your TV down.
What do you think about the kids that are getting incarcerated in school? You know, and
Could you speak up a little
You got to
bit, please?
speak into the phone.
times out of 10.
Can't hear you. Could you speak into the phone, please?
All right, this is regarding the kids that are getting in trouble in school
Okay.
and going to jail and serving time. Do you think that they have a harder time than the average person that doesn't have a background and that record on them and that SPIN number?
Okay,
And
that's
it's not drug related, or it is drug related? Do you think that that's...
okay. There is a fairly new book out called The New Jim Crow by Professor Alexander. And I recommend that everyone read this book because it talks about the effect of the criminal justice system on particularly black men, but that includes teenage boys. And to some extent, this applies to any kid. If you take a kid in high school and slap them with even a simple misdemeanor arrest record, that's going to leave an extra hard hurdle for them to overcome as they go through school or try to get a job or try to do anything. If they actually get convicted, they may not be able to get a job. If it's a drug conviction, marijuana conviction, they won't be able to get federal aid to go to college. If it's a felony level conviction, they probably can't get a job, and in most places they won't be allowed to rent an apartment. In the United States as a whole, about a third of all of the black males are under direct supervision of the criminal justice system. Probation, awaiting trial, in jail,
Paper.
parole, and there's no way they can conduct a normal life. It's been said for a long time that the worst effect of marijuana use on a young person is the involvement with the criminal justice system. Okay.
Oh, yeah. The criminal justice system just ruins people's lives.
Yeah, and it doesn't do anything particularly about the use of drugs. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get around to talking to Ann Webster about the women across Texas and the nation.
Some brilliant entrepreneurs came up with the idea of blocking the endocannabinoids in our body to create a new diet drug. The theory being, if cannabis gives people the munchies, then blocking the endocannabinoids would make them lose their appetites. The drug they developed, Rimonabant, did indeed reduce appetite by blocking the endocannabinoid receptors. But data from clinical trials showed that Rimonabant users suffered depression, anxiety, insomnia, and aggressive impulses at twice the rate of subjects given a placebo.
Well, Sanofi-Aventis, the company that had developed and was marketing this agent, did not study people with a history of psychiatric illness or depression before they applied for approval. That was probably a mistake. The EMA did approve it, and the drug's been on the market in Europe for a year and a half by now. And I've sort of said if there was any real problem with this that was more than just theoretical, we would know. Well, it turns out we do know. And they've suggested now that the risk for this agent outweighs the benefit.
In one study, there were 5 suicides among Rimonabant users because, as they discovered, endocannabinoids are also mood regulators with the capacity to make us feel euphoric or, when blocked, depressed. Rimonabant was finally withdrawn from the market in 2008. Researchers at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Texas reported that mice on Rimonabant developed potentially cancerous polyps at a far higher rate than controls, confirming that endocannabinoids are not only mood regulators, but tumor regulators as well.
Hi, I'm Ethan Nadelman, the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics. Hope you enjoy it.
We're back, Drugs, Crime, and Politics. With us tonight is Ann Webster, and you're here to talk about the women's marijuana movement and rally they had about a week ago.
Yes,
but,
we had.
First, you were making a comment in the break about the effect of marijuana conviction records on young people.
Yes, I have a dear friend that I only get to see online, but she is the president of Normal at UNT, and she informed me the other day, which I didn't know because I didn't go to school, didn't apply for financial aid, but if you are arrested for a misdemeanor conviction, if you're arrested and convicted and have a misdemeanor record for possession of marijuana, you will be denied financial aid for life. You could kill someone, you could have any other felony conviction, date rape, and you would still be eligible for financial aid, but a marijuana conviction will get you barred. Zero tolerance. That's zero tolerance in action.
I might add that that was an amendment to the law that was put in by a congressman who prided himself for about 20 years by being the upholder of virtue and high family values and against sin of every kind, and who left the Congress this last year under a cloud because of his own somewhat naughty behavior.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Oh, well, what is the women's marijuana movement?
The women's marijuana movement is a project of SAFER. The SAFERchoice.org is their website address. Its goal is to get women, mothers, sisters, daughters, grandmothers involved in the movement for legalization to end prohibition. Because of the terrible toll it takes on our families whenever a father or a provider in a household gets thrown in jail, the family no longer has their support.
Yeah.
And whenever children have parents in prison, I'm sure you know, it makes them much more likely to be thrown in prison themselves. And we've created this endless loop of no escape.
Right.
Like, you can't get a job, you can't provide for your family, then your family has to be on public assistance.
I will say that one of the most memorable interviews I have had on this show was 3 or 4 years ago with a woman who retired from a job as a juvenile probation officer and formed a group that created peer-level support groups for high school kids with parents in prison. And the stories she told about the problems these kids had were just heart-rending. They really were.
Things we couldn't imagine.
Yeah, yeah. And when we look at how the federal law has worked, with their conspiracy charges and delivery charges and their use of snitches, what we found under the federal law is unusually high numbers of mothers who are sent to federal prison because of really marginal involvement in their husband or boyfriend's drug dealing.
Right.
So, and with these disastrous effects on the children.
It is. It's horrible.
Oh,
It's horrible
really?
for families. And even mothers that don't use cannabis and don't agree for personal recreational use, they still need to stand up for the family. That's, I mean, that was the mother's primary job back when we helped repeal alcohol prohibition.
Yeah.
And I think especially with Prop 19 coming in California is really a wave of people saying this is enough. It's enough. It's enough of the craziness.
I think that the American public has quasi-legalized marijuana a long time ago. It's not a big deal
It's
anymore.
always been socially acceptable under the table.
Well, I wouldn't say always, but
No,
I'm
probably not always.
I'm a little older than you two.
Right. In my always.
Yeah. But from about 1970 on, the young people have seen nothing wrong with marijuana. And someone that was a 20-year-old college kid in 1970 is now 60 years old. So that's a pretty big chunk of the population that has grown up with marijuana being commonplace.
I think what really made it get out of hand is because no matter what the government used to say about it, it was so preposterous. Men will have breasts and all this sort of things. I think they're the ones that made people realize it can't be as bad as they say.
Well, the one thing that always tickled me was they would go around screaming that do marijuana and you lose all of your ambition and you'll flunk out of school. And then we find out that Carl Sagan, the astronomer, professor at Cornell, producer of the Cosmos TV series, advisor to NASA, was a marijuana smoker all his life long.
Very intelligent.
Yeah. And I know one recent survey among working scientists, about 20% of them said that they were now using brain booster drugs, which is not the same, but the same sort of feeling. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, hi. I was calling because, well, first of all, I love your show. I watch it all the time. I'm sure there's plenty of us out there. But either way, I was in a discussion with a friend of mine, and I was trying to tell him, you know, I think that as far as the cannabis or marijuana, whatever's the good term to use, I think it's still harmful to my lungs. But I'm not 100% positive, and he was trying to tell me it's way better than tobacco, but then I've heard it's a million times worse. But I figure you guys know the right answer.
Okay, thank you. There has been another new study out of the Lung Institute of the UCLA Medical School by the world's leading expert on lung cancer and pulmonary diseases, on studies involving thousands of patients over a 40-year period of time. He finds actually a lower incidence of lung cancer in marijuana smokers than in non-smokers. It has very definite beneficial effects on asthma, bronchitis, and some kinds of emphysema. Now, what happens if you go back to the 1970s when the first scare literature started coming out? This was shortly after they had found the connection between cigarettes and lung cancer. What you find and what you still see in the fright literature is smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer. Smoking marijuana burns the same sort of leafy material that smoking cigarettes does. It has the same sorts of chemicals in it. Therefore, don't you think that marijuana is going to cause lung cancer too? The problem is we've been looking for 40 years now. We have seen studies involving thousands of people And the harder we look, the less lung cancer we find.
Right. I mean, we've had, what, 28,000 medical papers written on marijuana? None of them are negative,
So,
other than the ones that relate to police officers.
So the lung cancer thing, I think, has been pretty thoroughly been shown to be incorrect. That there's no connection, no causal connection between smoking marijuana and developing lung cancer. And I might also add that if we look at modern marijuana users, we're finding more and more of them that use vaporizers or edibles of some kind, so they don't smoke anyway.
Right.
Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a question. First of all, I enjoy your show. Thank you guys very much for doing what you do.
Thank you.
But my question involves kind of the playing devil's advocate on the financial aspects of legalization of marijuana.
Okay.
And the realm of all the people who are dependent on marijuana being illegal. For example, all the probation officers, parole officers, and then the groups you need to go to, the police. And with the legalization of it, how would that affect those people and the trickle-down effect? I haven't studied a lot on how prohibition affected those people, but could you guys comment on that? And I want to hang up and listen.
Okay, thank you. What effect would legalization have on police officers, court employees, prison and jail employees? Well, let's look at Houston, which is something we all know about. Every time we hear anything from the city government about the police force, it's that we desperately need more police on the streets, we desperately need more patrol officers, and we don't have enough money and we can't run enough academy classes to turn them out.
Wait a minute. They also need a new jail.
Well, I was going to get to that.
Okay.
From what we have seen so far, it takes about 3 hours of a patrolman's time to process one marijuana arrest. That doesn't take much calculating to see that we could find plenty of use for these people, making up for the desperate shortages we've had. The county has been looking for over $200 million to build a new jail for over 2 years. Why not get the marijuana prisoners out and put some of the dangerous criminals in, and maybe we don't need to build a new jail?
How about we do this? How about these judges that we have here in Harris County that says everybody needs a bail bonds to get out of jail, except for the 15 that they let out last year on an NCB. But Austin let out 72,000.
Yeah, let's see what the next caller has
to say.
Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, Buford, enjoy the show here. I just remembered when I was watching the debate here and talking about school children, something that came up in my own life. I transferred into Harlingen High School in Harlingen, Texas, my junior year.
Now, Harlingen's down on the border.
Down in South Texas.
Yes.
And I was a debater in my old school, and I joined the debate team, and we were talking about various things. And the issue of marijuana came up, and I was kind of a little right-wing dweeb in my youth. I have since reformed, but I remember I distinctly made a thing. We're talking about marijuana. I said, well, it does, it does harm people and all that, and it's not good for young people. And this very nice senior who was on the debate kind of laughed, and he says, you really don't say anything like that around here, because 8 of the top 10 academically ranked students in this graduating class are notorious stoners. And we all laughed, and I said, well, I better keep my mouth shut here. And it started my evolution to understanding that about the government propaganda. But I was taken aback because it was kind of funny that would happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you a lot for that comment. I do know that there was one study, and it's been years ago now, looking at high school kids and looking at those that admitted to the use of marijuana. And they found what the statisticians call a bimodal distribution. In other words, there were two clumps of them that used a whole lot more marijuana than most students. One high clump were the traditional slackers that we see in all of the comedy movies, the ones that didn't do well, the ones that were in trouble, the ones that dropped out. But the other large and the highest clump of marijuana users were the top academic students, the top athletes, the top participants in extracurricular activity, the top elected student officers. The group that didn't use marijuana were those in the middle. And we still haven't gotten much chance to talk to Ann. We'll take a break and get her into the conversation more when we come back.
Get back, zombie. According to the Institute of Medicine's 1999 report on marijuana, there is no conclusive evidence that the drug effects of marijuana are causally linked to the subsequent abuse of other illicit drugs.
Brains. I need brains.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Our guest tonight is Ann Webster, representing the women's marijuana movement, which is part of SAFER, but I believe we've got someone else waiting on the phones. Hello, caller. Thank you for waiting.
Hi, Buford. It's Dean calling in Heckley.
Hey, Dean. How are you, buddy?
And that's Ann, is it, with you guys?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Hello, Ann.
Hello.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I interviewed a couple of others active within the women's medical marijuana movement this past week. Got a chance to speak with, looking for her name here at the moment, Eva Inns of the medical marijuana movement. She's working with the Prop 19 group out there in California.
Yes, she was my coordinator that I talked with.
Oh, okay.
Great
and also spoke with Hannah Dershowitz. She's also working with the medical marijuana movement. She's also with Prop 19 as well. And I think it's time for, over the years they would do polls and see who's in favor of medical marijuana or marijuana in general. And, usually the women would be lagging about 10 percentage points behind. But I think people are, and women are beginning to realize that it's a better way to protect their children by getting rid of the black market in marijuana. Children no longer exposed to potential purchases of other drugs if they're out of weed. But more importantly, I think people are beginning to recognize across the board that marijuana is safer than alcohol. Without naming any names or channels, I want to say this. Today I was invited by a local television reporter to do an interview about that subject, marijuana being safer than alcohol. And that went well, but I talked to him. It didn't air at the time it was scheduled. And I talked to him, and he said they can't find anyone to stand on the opposite side of that fence, anyone willing to talk about
the danger of marijuana in comparison to alcohol. And I think that's beginning to resonate around the country. What do you guys think?
It's resonating everywhere but in the legislative assemblies.
Right.
When have they listened to the people?
Well, and isn't that the truth? Now, also wanted to say that this past week, also spoke with Mary Jane Borden. She was preparing a mail out, if you will, a handout that other reform groups could use to talk about the relative dangers of drugs and the government stats and so forth. And you can access that at drugwarfacts.org. That's FACTS, drugwarfacts.org.
Which, incidentally, is a great website for basic information about what goes on with all of the drug laws. It's a wonderful resource.
Yes, it is.
Indeed. Now, and I also, this past Sunday when my shows air, I was able to grab a few minutes with Jody Emery. She's the wife of Canadian entrepreneur Mark Emery, who was just a few weeks back was sentenced to 5 years in the U.S. federal pen for selling seeds via the mail. He never even left Canada. He just took orders and sent the seeds to adults purchasing those seeds. And what a lot of folks don't realize is that that bonanza of seeds, the hundreds of strains which he made available, is responsible for many of the new strains we have in the U.S. and the support or the relief of certain maladies that is derived from the various strains. And it was Mark Emery who helped bring about that diversity of the seed strains.
Well, Dean, forgive an old cynic for interrupting here, but even though the paperwork in the courthouse said that Mark Emery was convicted for importing marijuana seeds, most of us know that in truth he was convicted for publishing Cannabis Culture magazine and being an outspoken spokesman for reform.
Well, sure, and in so doing, in publishing his magazine and in selling those seeds, he made more than $4 million in profits, which he gave away to drug reform organizations all around the U.S., Canada, and the world, in fact. He supported ballot measures and seminars and debates and programming. He actually gave several $1,000s to my organization, the Drug Truth Network, to keep the lights on, to keep from having to move under a bridge about 5 years ago. Yeah. And he has no money to speak of. His wife is actually hoping that folks will help her acquire a lawyer so that they might hopefully move him from U.S. jurisdiction up into Canada. Yeah. And folks could learn more about that if they go to cannabisculture.com.
You know, there's another way to show how hypocritical that is, because anybody with a medical card out in California can acquire seeds. Right in California, well, they're producing. We have seed producers in California. Yeah. We have people that are crossing plants out there making new strains.
Yes, but the feds could bust them if they wanted to.
The feds have decided to make an example out of him because he's high profile.
Yeah.
Right, and it was, I think, then drug czar Karen Tandy who issued a statement the day they indicted Mark Emery, saying that that they were taking one of the top terrorist drug gang members off the streets, but that they were also depriving the reform community of funding. Yeah. That, as you said, Buford was their primary focus.
Yeah. While you're on the phone, Dean, I want to ask you about something. You kind of slapped my hand last night for being cynical about a petition you've gotten up, and I think I need to pay you back by letting you explain that petition and ask people to sign it now.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, Buford, I mean, the hope is minimal that I will get any response, but the signatures will help hold their feet to the fire, as will, phone calls, etc. to...
what are you asking for in your petition?
Okay, quickly, it's a Seeking Unvarnished Truth About Drug Wars is the name of the petition. I directed it to the Office of National Drug Control Policy and the Drug Enforcement Agency, and it's the Drug Truth Network with more than 90 affiliates, been on the airwaves for 9 years. Sole subject is the unvarnished truth about the prohibition of drugs. We have repeatedly attempted over those 9 years to garner an interview with all previous administrators of the DEA and all prior directors of the ONDCP to no avail. Therefore, we, the undersigned, request that Michelle Leonhardt, the current administrator of the DEA, and Gil Kerlikowski, the current director of the ONDCP, make themselves immediately available as guests on the Drug Truth Network radio programs to clarify the need for an eternal war on plant products. And you can access that online. I'm asking you viewers out there to please do so. Go to petitiononline.com/DTN.
Do you have a link to that on your Drug Truth webpage?
I do. If you go to drugtruth.net, there's kind of an opening paragraph in the middle, and then in the second paragraph, it's got a little blurb about this, and it has a link. Sign the petition. Click that. It will take you right to it. And I wanted to tell you, this past week, I also had some great fun on the Century of Lies program. I got a chance to interview comedian Jim Brewer. Folks might remember him from Saturday Night Live. He did Goat Boy and Joe Pesci imitations, and he was one of the stars of Half Baked. He's got a new book out called I'm Not High, which doesn't necessarily talk about the fact that he never gets high, but the fact that he just looks stoned all the time. And this coming week, this coming Sunday, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., I got two guests coming on. We'll have Alan Clear. He's the director of the Harm Reduction Coalition. They're having a conference in Austin, November 18th to 21st. And then we'll also hear from Mr. Terrence Papa. He's author of a nonfiction book, Drug Lord, which recounts the history of one of the most infamous drug lords in Mexico, his youth, his empire, and then his eventual decline. But it's not an uncommon story. It goes on. It's continuing in Mexico as we speak.
And where can people find your radio programs?
Yes, sir. You can listen live on KPFT, which is 90.1 FM. That's Sunday, 6:30 to 7:30. Or you can tune in on via the web, via the link there in the first paragraph at drugtruth.net.
Okay. Thank you, Dean.
I got a question to ask you.
Yes, sir.
Do you think the reason that they won't debate you is they remember back when Jesse Ventura had one of them on his program?
Well, it might be, but maybe they've learned their lesson. I once debated the head of the high-intensity drug trafficking area here at the Houston Community College, and when it was over, I walked up, shook his hand, and said, "Hey, would you like to take this on the radio?" He said, "No way in hell."
Okay, thank you, Dean. It's always good to hear from you. Well, Ann, tell us about the conference that you all had about 10 days ago.
It was October the 5th.
Okay.
We had a little problem here in Houston. Our press releases got mixed up, so our location started out at Discovery Green, and I had permit problems at Discovery Green. I didn't know it was a private park previous to trying to set this up. So I ended up in front of City Hall with my children, passing out the flyers from the women's marijuana movement to try and, just reach out to some people and see a mother out there.
Did you have your rally?
We didn't have anyone here. No media showed up. Like I said, I didn't walk from City Hall down to Discovery Green.
Well, I think you told me that in Austin, though, that there was
They had a big show in
story.
Austin. They had a big show in Denver. Of course, Denver, I think, is the seat of the women's marijuana movement. I think they're based there in Denver.
Denver's gotten...
But there were 24 cities across the U.S. that had at least one person willing to come out and say, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a mother. This is...
Well, good.
We have to end this.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem has been, up until very recently, the traditional view of the family has kind of cut women out of both politics and the information circuit. Luckily, over the past couple of decades, part of those walls have broken down. Women are more tuned into what's going on. They're making their voices heard more.
To me, it's more like a realization of what we lost by trying to compete with men.
Yeah.
In the 70s, feminism brought about us trying to compete with men. And I think now women are realizing that we need to take our spot back as protectors of the family and protectors of children and protectors of people in general.
Well,
that's a biological gift. I'm not talking politics. That's a biological gift.
I might disagree with you in that I think I have some protective roles as well.
Of course you do. But you didn't relinquish yours to go to work.
Right. And I think finding that balance is important. One thing that has puzzled me for many years is that although we hear all of these things about drug testing and drugs at school and police dogs sniffing in the classrooms, I never hear of these issues being brought up at any parent-teachers meetings. I never hear them brought up by groups at church Sunday school meetings or anything. Aren't these traditional means of communication, especially as far as family-based women are concerned? Why isn't there any movement happening there?
That's a good question. I homeschool my children.
Okay.
I choose to homeschool because of the situation in public schools. Yeah. I wouldn't subject them to that.
Yeah.
But I think women are torn between their responsibilities. I know a lot of women that work and they don't have the time that they would normally have to dedicate to a PTA meeting to head up, say, hey, why are there drug dogs in our elementary school? Yeah. It's not conducive to learning.
Yeah. Well, let's see who's on the phone now.
No one.
Oh, okay. It's time to take another break, and then we'll come back and wrap things up.
You're watching the Drug Crime and Politics show. I need less business. Help change the laws. Fewer people locked up for this foolishness will help all of us.
We're back with Ann Webster, a mother of 3 and an advocate for marijuana reform, and Clayton Jones as usual. So Ann's been telling us about efforts to try to get more women and particularly more mothers involved in a more sensible approach to marijuana laws. And Clayton tells me he wants to make a political gripe here.
Yes. I live in Spring Branch. My state representative is Dwayne Bohack. What I'd like everybody to do that's listening to the program tonight, even if you don't live in his district, I would like people to start calling him tomorrow. He had promised that his survey would have a marijuana question. The question was going to be to the effect of, do Texas citizens should have the right to buy medical marijuana legally? And he promised it would go on the questionnaire. It didn't go on. And his secretary says that he meant a telephone survey, that he can't give me a name of it or who did it or what the questions were. So I would like to give everybody his phone number. And if you would call him tomorrow and have your friends call him and tell him you don't appreciate not having the question on his questionnaire. That his phone number is 713-460. Wait a minute. 460-2800. And the more people that we can get to call this man, his office, it will be the more chances of the next questionnaire having our question on it.
If you didn't get that phone number, you can go to the Texas Legislature website, and that will give you all of the contact information for any member of the Texas Legislature. And if you're not sure who your own representative is, if you simply type in your zip code, it will give you the name and the addresses and phone numbers and email addresses of your representative and state senator. So these are your people. They're your representatives. But they can only do what you want them to do if you let them know what it is. And sometimes that means letting them know often, often, often. Okay, I guess that was another false alarm with no one on the phone.
I've been going to see Dwayne Bohack at least a couple of times a year since he's been in office.
Yeah.
And it's taken all these years to finally get him to where you almost agree to it.
Well, one of the things that has surprised me is during the last legislative session, several members of the legislature, House of Representatives particularly, said that they had not been contacted by anyone about the medical marijuana issue at all. And if that's true, that's our fault, people. It's not theirs. The only way that citizens can get things done is by acting like citizens. I've got a couple of meetings that I've been asked to announce. The Green Party is having a big ballot bash on the 14th. That's tomorrow, I believe, from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. at Bartolomeo's at 7080 Telephone Road. There will be bands and speakers. The Houston Normal meeting will be on the 21st at 7:30 at the West Gray Cafe at 415 West Gray Street. That's in Houston, just slightly downtown from Montrose Boulevard. That's usually a pretty good, active meeting.
We've had quite a few people coming last few meetings.
Well, that's good. It's another place to get your voice in at the active level. And you have a couple of last words to say. I think you said you had a couple of websites you wanted to include.
I think you said that you were going to put the websites up on your website. There's womensmarijuanamovement.org, and that's a project of saferchoice.org. There's Moms for Marijuana, and Normal has a division called Women's Alliance. So there's plenty of places for moms and women to get involved on their own level. And you can start at the beginning. I'm at the beginning. I haven't been doing this that long. You just have to get in and stand up for what you know is right.
And the more you stand up and the more noise you make,
the more will change.
Things that you can.
Prop 19, I think, is really going to help us push this over the hill.
Okay. Okay. I am getting confused about whether there's someone on the phone or not. But there's only 3 weeks now until the election. We don't have any marijuana issues directly on the ballot in Texas. For one thing, Texas does not have any kind of initiative or referendum system. But every member of the state House of Representatives is up for election. One of the cadres of the Senate is up for election this year. It's up to you who goes to those seats. Likewise, all of the House of Representatives seats from Texas in Washington are up for grabs this year. That's one where your vote can make a difference. There are, I think the picture in the paper today or yesterday showed this horrendous piece of paper and said that Houston this year had the longest ballot in its whole history. Now, it may be long, it may be hard to work through, but you owe it to yourself, to your future, and to your children to study the issues, study the candidates, and get out and vote. But make it an informed vote, know who the people are, know who they represent, know whether you want them speaking for you. And then once they've been elected, make sure that they know what you want. And what we have heard over the years from people in elective office is that they're always anxious to hear from voters, but that the communications that make the most difference, that carry the greatest weight, are those that are handwritten, and I pity the poor assistant that has to try to decipher my scrawl, handwritten on paper, sent through the mail with a stamp. That's the most effective way you can communicate. If you can't do that, send them an email, send them a phone call, or go and see them. They all have offices in their home district. You can find their addresses easily. Make an appointment, go see them while they're in your hometown, and tell them what you think the people's business is. Now, I honestly think, and my crystal ball is as cloudy as anyone else's, but I honestly think that this election coming up in 3 weeks nationwide is going to be a real watershed issue on the question of marijuana. Frankly, if Proposition 19 passes in California, and it's quite possible that it will, then it's just a matter of picking up the pieces and sweeping out the trash. It's going to be over at that time. So let's all see what happens in the next month. Let's all stay active. Let's stay engaged. And we'll be getting back together here at Drugs, Crime, and Politics one more time before the election. I want to thank Ann for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank Clayton for being here as usual. And I especially want to thank all of you for tuning in to watch Drug, Crimes, and Politics. And we'll see you back at this same spot in 2 weeks. So.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories in you.
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. The end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize oral drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on drugs.